Hello, YouTube. You have found the Honestly Alicia podcast. I'm your host, Alicia, and I believe our personal journeys, even the challenging parts, can be powerful tools for growth. In this podcast, we dive into the heart of what it means to be a healthy follower of Jesus. Through stories and conversations that inspire and inform, we'll uncover practical ways to strengthen relationships, develop emotional resilience, and explore ways to grow. Because when we're healthy and whole, we become incredible ambassadors for Jesus. Have you ever wondered why you react to certain situations in a way that feels out of your control? Or why you keep finding yourself in the same unhealthy patterns no matter how hard you try to break them? A lot of times, the answers to these questions lie not just in our own experiences, but in the ones that have been passed down to us. It can be a heavy topic, but it's one that can bring clarity, understanding, and in time, healing. Generational trauma. Today, I'm incredibly honored to have a guest who's dedicated her life to helping people navigate this very subject. Gina Birkemeier is a licensed professional counselor and the author of the powerful new book, Generations Deep. In this conversation, we dive into what generational trauma actually is, how our nervous systems can become so familiar with dysfunction, and how that can keep us stuck in unhealthy cycles. We explore the crucial role of faith in the healing journey, and how being a follower of Jesus and engaging in therapy are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they can work hand in hand to lead to deeper transformation. Gina provides us with a helpful definition of trauma and distinguishes between big T and little t trauma. She also walks us through the concept of emotionally corrective experiences, helps us understand attachment styles, and gives us a roadmap for what to do with the emotions and the bodily sensations that can often feel so overwhelming. This episode is a must listen for anyone ready to break free from the past and build a healthier future, not just for themselves, but for generations to come. Enjoy my conversation with Gina Birkemeier. All right. Thank you so much. I'm excited that you're here, and I can't wait to have this conversation together.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. All right. So let's just jump in here. I'll show the book because we do have, this will be audio and YouTube. So the book is Generations Deep, Unmasking Inherited Dysfunction and Trauma to Rewrite Our Stories Through Faith and Therapy. So would you share, I know, that's a lot to unpack.
A lot. It's a lot.
Yeah. I know. Would you like to share about the book and specifically why you wrote it?
Sure. Well, the reason I wrote it is because it's the story that I lived, the story that my family lived. It goes back to my great-grandparents and comes forward to me a little bit about my kids, but it really was the book that was asking to be written. I had another one in mind, but God was like, no, it all has to go in there, right? And so I think that's what took it a little bit longer than maybe it would have taken had I just went, okay. So I decided to surrender basically and write the book that was asking to be written. And it is the story of generational patterns of trauma, of dysfunction, manifesting from one generation to the next, and how they're interconnected, even though they might look a little bit different from generation to generation. And the main reason that I wanted to tell the story was because I found myself as a mental health professional working with people who were also dealing with these things. And I knew I could help them one person at a time. But what I really wanted to do was be able to reach people who I would never have the privilege of sitting in the room with. And so the book was really the way to do that. I had some friends who were lovingly encouraging me to write the book. And so, so I just said yes and wrote it. And God has done things with it that I never expected would have happened.
Yes, that's amazing.
Thank you.
So who is the book for? You kind of said that. But also, I think sometimes if people have grown up in family systems that perhaps have histories of dysfunction or trauma, they might not even recognize that. And I think that could be one of the things that might stop people from picking this up, that they'd be like, okay, well, even if I pick this up, then does that mean that I'm calling out my family, that I don't
Sure.
have a good family, or that I don't, you know, so how can someone know if this is a book that could be helpful to them?
I once had a reviewer say that if you are a human who knows humans that was raised by humans, then this book is for you. And it still is one of my favorite reviews to this day. And I think it's true.
Yeah.
Part of it is we get that whole honor your father and mother wrong in this arena, right? We think honoring means keeping the secrets. But the truth is that we are only as sick as our secrets. And that goes for individuals and for systems. And a family is a system. There are pieces of the book that might resonate deeply with you, but other pieces that might not. And
Yeah.
that's okay. It's the whole of the book that I want people to embrace and recognize, just helping people have those aha moments about their own story. When we've been steeped in patterns of trauma and dysfunction, it becomes so normal, and the nervous system will gravitate towards the familiar, even if it's not healthy, and repel away from the things that might be healthy, like peace. And so that's one of the things that the book asks you to do, is really take a look at what has formed and informed what you believe about yourself, about God, about other people, and does that really align with the life that God has created you to live? And I think that there is a piece of that that is true for all of us. And I would say to the people who say, I've actually had none of that in my history, that is yay for you. That is an amazing thing. You know people who do. You
Yes.
love and walk with people who do. So
Yes.
in that vein, then this book becomes something that is for you. It's just for you in a different way.
I agree. I have a strong relationship with my parents, and they were present and loving. And as I'm reading it, I'm thinking about people that I love, people that I encouraged, and how can me understanding their systems, how they view the world, and how to meet them and love them well. I think it's been a really incredible resource.
Thank you. I'm so glad to hear that you're also looking through that lens. That's wonderful.
Mhm. Yeah. Want to go back to what you said about the nervous system will be drawn to and attracted to something that feels familiar,
Mm,
even if perhaps that's not healthy. Could you maybe give an example?
sure. Uh, Let me keep it broad, because
Yeah.
if I don't want to get so specific that
Yeah.
a listener might say that doesn't apply to me, I'd like
Right.
to keep it broad enough that people could say, oh, I could see that. Okay.
Yeah.
So we can take any brand of dysfunction, whether we're talking about something that was traumatic or dysfunctional, just to where it sort of malformed your belief about some things. Okay. And our nervous systems respond to our environment. And we get familiar with what is happening in our environment, and we find function in the dysfunction, so that is really the way we operate in the world. So those places that feel very peaceful, very calm, where there is no sense of threat, where there is no need to navigate and be on high alert, that does not feel safe because it's so unfamiliar. So you literally don't know how to be in those spaces.
Hmm.
Contrast that with the spaces that are high conflict, the spaces that are high drama, the spaces that maybe there's some neglect going on there. And you know how to navigate those things. You know
Hmm.
how to watch for the keys and the triggers, how to keep the people around you in a space that keeps you safe. When you're not having to work for your safety, that doesn't feel safe because you don't know how to just rest. Your nervous system doesn't know how to just rest, and so you want to stay away from that because it's so unfamiliar. You don't trust it. So,
Right. Like you almost think this can't be safe
right.
because it's not what I am used to feeling. I'm just reiterating, I think, what you're saying. I know how to deal with walking on eggshells around mom or dad or uncle or brother or whatever. But when everyone's calm, it just feels wrong because I'm not familiar with it.
Yes. And we could even use a simple analogy of geography. If you're in your own hometown, even though you know there's some areas that are a little sketchy, if you have to go through those areas, it isn't that big of a deal because you know exactly how to get through it. You know where to go. If you have to stop somewhere in those sketchy areas, you know how to be on alert. You know how
Yeah.
to make sure that you're safe in your surroundings. But if you go to another country, and you've never been there before and you're not with someone from there and you're just put in a car and left to your own devices, you don't know what areas are safe, even though it could be the most safe area you've ever been in. But your nervous system doesn't acknowledge that because you don't see anything that is familiar around you. And so it's all going to feel like a threat, even though it isn't. You're going to be on high alert, even though there's no need to be. So it's kind of that difference between the familiar and the unfamiliar that really drives our responses to our surroundings and to our relationships. And this is why it's so important to take ownership of our healing. Because otherwise what happens, we kind of have this propensity to continue to repair. And so if we keep repeating, then we're going to find all the relationships that hold that same level of dysfunction, of trauma, of toxicity. That's where we're going to gravitate because those are what's going to feel familiar versus the relationships that feel safe, where we're going to repel those away from us because that doesn't feel safe. And so we say yes to the things that aren't safe and we say no to the things that are. And we want to flip that script.
Yeah.
And that's why healing is so important.
So it glitched for just a second. At the beginning, you said, I feel like you said something about repair. It was just that little phrase. Could you say that,
Yes.
that phrase again?
We tend to repeat what we don't repair.
Repeat what we don't repair. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. So can you share a little bit how your faith has played part in your work and your healing? And then maybe I'll ask a couple questions or maybe even read or have you read something from chapter 20. I was pretty excited about that chapter.
Sure. So for me, actually, the book sort of starts with faith. I talk about a verse that says the sins of the father are visited to the third and fourth generation. And that really bothered me for a long time. It felt like, so how does this loving, benevolent God crack a whip that leaves a mark 3 and 4 generations out? That feels very punitive to me. I don't understand that. But as I sort of took this journey of unlearning who I thought God was and relearning about the real Jesus, if you will, what I came to recognize was what that is a warning from a benevolent God that says, if you don't heal these things, if you don't break these cycles and change these patterns, you are going to transmit anything that you don't transform. It will happen to the next generation and after and after and after. And that was kind of a turning point for me, that redefining of that verse. And then also I am a self-proclaimed nerd. I love neuroscience. I love neuroscience. And the more I learned about neuroscience, the more I recognized this is scriptural. This is like, it's so Kepler says that science is just thinking God's thoughts after him. And I the more I learn about neuroscience, the more confident I am that that is the truth.
I know.
So see things like being transformed by the renewing of your mind in Romans 12. Well, that renewing, that's a perpetual tense. That means something that can always happen. And we now know that neuroplasticity and neurogenesis happens throughout the life cycle. There's scriptures that talk about, is it Philippians, that talks about whatever's true, whatever's lovely, think on these things. Well, we now know that that rewires your brain. When you see in scripture that it talks about gratitude, we know that the brain cannot be both anxious and grateful at the same time. The hippocampus can't do that. So if we focus on gratitude, then we're not anxious. And all of these things that point to us being wired for the healing, not wired for the trauma, but wired for the healing. And the more I learned about both, the stronger both became for me, especially the connection between the two.
I want to kind of go back a teeny bit. Can you and I establish a working definition of trauma? Because I feel like probably you and I are speaking the same language, but maybe others are listening to the word trauma and they're thinking, you know, car accident, war hero, stuff like that. Well, would you be willing? Yeah. Do you have a specific definition that you stick to?
So I keep it a little bit looser than that. And here's why. We have this tendency to want to look at the big T traumas and we want to say that is trauma. And the problem with that is, first of all, yes, those are absolutely traumatic.
Yes.
Sexual abuse, physical abuse, spiritual abuse, neglect, all of those things, they are traumatic, 100%. And also, there are other things that are traumatic as well, especially when it's a lot of what we would say little t traumas that accumulate. Multiple of those, right, can have the same impact.
Yes.
So I would say if we want to look at trauma as anything that overwhelms the nervous system to the point that we are not able to react had that been absent. On the flip side, it is also things that were not present that needed to be present in order for us to feel safe in the moment and develop appropriately. So in my line of work, we have something called developmental trauma. And developmental trauma are things that happen within specific developmental windows of a child's growth that cause them to be somewhat stunted emotionally at those stages because they did not get what they needed. We can talk about attachment. That's a very simple one. Within the first couple years of life, whenever there is an attachment wound of some sort, then that causes an impact in our relationships lifelong. The way, if we don't heal it, the way that we then attach to other people, whether it's anxiously or avoidantly. And those attachment wounds can happen at any time in the developmental life cycle. Anytime that those things happen within childhood, we know that we're looking at something that tells us we didn't get what we needed, or either something was missing or something happened to us to rupture something within us that does not allow us to develop into who God has for us to be. So when I say trauma, and in the book, there's something called the ETPQ, which is the Expanded Trauma Perspective Questionnaire. And the reason I created that with the help of 60 other trauma-informed therapists was to help people broaden their perspective of what might have been traumatic in their life, because we have this tendency to invalidate ourselves or compare what happened to us to what happened to someone else.
Right.
And oh, well, at least I didn't go through blah, 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 right? And so as soon as we talk that way over ourselves, as soon as we speak that over ourselves, we have now shut down anything that can be open to healing because we're not willing to name it. So we can't do anything with what is left unnamed. Yeah, that's why I try not to get too in the weeds of quantifying what trauma can be, because it is truly different for everyone.
Right. That's really incredible that you developed
Thank you.
a broader and more exhaustive way for people to look at it and to understand it. Right. Yeah. Do you have the book with you?
Probably. I mean, there's got to be 100 copies of it around.
Right.
Yeah.
Would you feel okay if I read just one or two sentences? And then you could unpack. All right, let's see. So at the bottom of 261, I feel like this was very powerful. So it's one paragraph. It's the one that ends with the book of Esther. So many have prayed and prayed for healing or rescue, but no rescue or healing came. Maybe they cried out to God to help them remember what happened to them, or cried out to him to stop the memories from flooding them. In any of those cases, if prayers went unanswered, it is likely they are not going to seek out God's involvement or trust God enough to allow him to play a role in their healing. We must make space for them to travel the road to heal the way they need to. God can be the orchestrator of their healing, even if they aren't calling on his name. And then you have this in parentheses. Think. Book of Esther. In the Old Testament, God was all over it, yet never mentioned by name. And I thought that was so beautiful and such a thoughtful perspective. So if you have anything you want to elaborate on or say more about that, I'd love to hear anything.
Thank you. It speaks for me to the concept of the chasm that has been created between faith and therapy. And that isn't something that God ever encouraged us to do. That's something that we have done, whether leaning too deeply into the scriptural pieces without recognizing what's going on in the brain and the body, or completely moving away from the scripture, not using it at all, and leaning all into the science and the evidence-based practice piece of it. And so in the book of Esther, we do see that God is so gloriously present in that book. He is so active in everything that is happening, but he's not mentioned by name. And it's kind of like, remember we talked about gratitude earlier, and a lot of people have said to me, well, the practice of gratitude works whether you do it from a biblically based perspective or you just do it from kind of a metaphysical or new age spiritual perspective. It still works the same for the brain. And I will say that that is true because God created the brain to respond that way to gratitude. It does work better if you focus it on God. There is definitely, there's some journal articles out there that really do show that. However, it works the same way, right? It's that common grace that God causes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust, the sun to shine on the just and the unjust. And so it's that common grace piece. But I think that we have gotten really far away from that in some Christian circles where we don't want to talk about that. I was very disheartened recently where a pastor was talking about OCD, and this person was diagnosed OCD and was brave enough, because they knew their question would be read like in a church. This person, they didn't give their name, of course, but they were brave enough to say, this is the symptomology that I'm dealing with. And the pastor basically said, quote, scripture to yourself enough and your OCD will go away. And if it isn't getting better, you're not doing it enough. And it was, hope I can say this on your show, Alicia, it was a butt scrunch moment for me. I was like, what just happened? You know, like all the flaming signals were going off in my brain. No, 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 no. And I just thought about the poor soul that sent that in. And now they're going to think that their OCD is a crisis of faith.
Yes.
Not something going on in the brain that needs to be treated both from that scriptural perspective and that therapeutic perspective. And that was just so heartbreaking to me and reminded me that we still have a really long way to go. And so, yes, I mean, I love that you're wearing your Jesus in Therapy shirt. I love it so much because there's literally the section that you read from is called Jesus and a Therapist. There is like a whole section of the book that is named that for this very reason. We have to learn how to put those two things together if we are to be relevant to the people that are hurting the most and in need the most in our churches.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to move on to emotionally corrective experiences.
Yes.
I love this. So would you explain what it is? Because it's probably going to be a new concept for lots of listeners, and then give an example of one.
Sure. So emotionally corrective experiences are kind of like the salve that happens in the present that treats the wound that happened in the past, emotionally speaking. So we're able to have these emotionally corrective experiences with people who give us an experience that's different than what we had in the past. Often it has to do with how we see ourselves, or a message that has been spoken over us, or something that we have adopted as a belief within us about our value, about what our meaning is, and that has caused this wound, often related to our identity. And then we have this emotionally corrective experience with someone, and it's almost like this retroactive effect that it kind of goes back in time and finds that wound and heals it at its core.
Mm-hmm.
And I can give you an example from the book, actually, of one of my emotionally corrective experiences. And that happened with a professor that I had in my graduate degree. I had just come off of a really rough supervision session I was in practicum at the time. And it was just a disheartening experience that I had. And I was in my tiny little cohort, and we were all together talking about our experiences at our sites and with our supervisors. And I shared this experience that I had that was just so gut-wrenching. And it hit the core of me, which is you're not good enough, right? Like you're not good enough. It was that value statement, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it felt terrible. And so I'm risking being vulnerable. I'm saying it in my tiny little cohort with my professor there. And I finish, and my professor kind of sat quietly for a moment. The whole group did. And then he said, thank you for sharing. And then he went on to the next person. And then my friend Simon from the cohort goes, hold on, hang on a second. And he turns his body to face me and looks me in the eyeballs and says, did you get what you needed just then? Did you get what you needed from us? and I froze. I absolutely froze. And I can tell you, it was the most profound body experience. Like everything was on fire inside of me, and I wanted to run from the room. I could feel my face getting hot, and because I felt so seen. And that up to that point had not been a big piece of my story. I felt there were places where I felt seen, but at the core, I didn't really feel seen that often. And I said, and all I could eke out was no, like this little tiny no. And the professor then says, I am so sorry. And then he goes on to talk about his own reaction to what I said, him thinking that he had failed me as a professor by putting me in that spot, and that he was frustrated with my supervisor, but he wanted to stay professional and not say that.
Right.
And then what he ended up saying was, I'm pulling you from that spot. I'm not putting anybody else back there. Like all of these, I'm so sorry that happened. Right. And that's like the end. And I felt like 10,000 pounds came off of me. And because there was a man in my life of authority who I looked up to and cared for, who came to my rescue and defense, actually two men who came to my rescue and defense. And that had been, I have a huge story of abandonment by male figures. I have sexual trauma in my history. And so these two men who stood up for me in that moment, not wanting anything from me in return.
Right. There was no, it wasn't
no
an
transaction
exchange.
there.
Mm-hmm.
No,
Transaction.
It was just about making sure I was okay and that I was protected and that it wouldn't happen to me again. Something that the little girl I carry inside longed for years. And in that moment, it felt like so much weight came off of me. And we finished our cohort, because obviously there's other people who need to tell their stories. I'm present for them. I get in my car, and I don't know if I can do this without getting emotional now. I
can feel it here. It's like warm and just almost tight, like like it's gonna go up into my throat and get tight. Yeah.
Yeah. I get in my car and I start to pull out of the parking lot, and I have to pull over because I'm just sobbing. I'm just sobbing these tears of being seen and being loved and being known in that moment. And it was so profound. It was literally life changing. And I will say this, not all emotionally corrective experiences are that big.
Right.
Sometimes they're really little. Sometimes they're really small. An example is when my husband and I were dating, and we had our first little tiff with each other. And I was very used to always being the one that was wrong, or gaslighted into thinking I was the one that was wrong, right? That goes back to my childhood. And in this moment of this tiff, he takes a breath and says, I'm sorry, I didn't handle that well. And I was like, what? Like, I'm already preparing to defend, right?
Whatever.
I'm already, like, dukes are up. What kind of gaslighting am I going to get here? How is this going to feel, And that wasn't it at all. He was just like, oh gosh, I'm sorry. I did not handle that well. And I was like, wow. And it was just this beautiful corrective experience.
Yeah.
And the really great thing about emotionally corrective experiences is that after a while, you can actually learn how to have them within yourself, with those little or younger pieces of yourself. And there's examples in the book of me doing that. You have them with God, and there's examples of that happening in my life in the book. But you can also seek out relationships that encourage that in your life. You can seek out relationships that offer those opportunities for emotionally corrective experiences. Again, another thing that points to how God has wired us for the reduction and the healing, not for the trauma.
Yeah. So let's say somebody wants to seek that out. I feel like if your nervous system is in a way attracted to what you're used to, how do you override it and look for people that could provide emotionally corrective experiences when everything within you says not safe, not safe,
not safe, not safe, not safe. Yeah. Yeah. So I would say this is not a journey meant to be taken alone. This is where it's really important to find a therapist who understands trauma, particularly developmental trauma, when we are in need of those emotionally corrective experiences. And arguably that's throughout the life cycle. We need those. They're just the balm for our soul. However, when we have trauma in our history, developmental trauma in our history, That and earned secure attachment are two things that we deeply, deeply need to help us heal. But we don't know how to go after those things if we don't know what a safe relationship looks like. And
Okay.
that is where we really need some help. Just like we would go to a doctor. If what
Mhm.
we're doing isn't working, we go to the doctor to get some help. If we're trying to get fit and what we're doing isn't working, we go to a trainer. If we can't fix our car, we take it to a mechanic. This is the same, like this is our insides, right? And if we don't know how to fix our insides, then we want to go to someone who understands our emotional, spiritual, and physical well-being and can help us understand what it means to be in those safe relationships.
Hmm. So you're saying it's probably not something that, just because somebody has really great intellect, that you can think your way through on your own without some guidance and some, maybe a mirror.
Right, because we're not talking about intellect here. We're talking about emotions. They're called emotionally corrective experiences, not intellectually corrective experiences.
That is such a good point. I know, because I'm just thinking about left brain people that might be like, okay, I hear what she's saying. Da, 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 da. I'm going to do steps A, B, and C. And I'm going to do that because I understand. And you're saying it's a little more complicated than that.
Right. And not quite so linear as we would want it to be. Yeah, this healing journey is not linear at all. And people get sometimes disheartened by that because it feels like, oh, I've taken some steps backward, or I really screwed that up. I thought I was over that, right? Like we have those little
Inner
negative
critics.
inner critic. That's the word I was looking for.
Mhm.
And we have the inner critic that just wants to come. Nope, you just throw in the towel. You didn't do that
Yeah.
right, you know. And so that's dangerous to let those run wild with us, right? Like we have to understand that it's not this linear. We do A, then we do B, then we do C, and then pretty soon we'll be to Z, which is healed, right? Like, okay, this is the formula. That's why anytime somebody says, "Oh, this is the
I
formula,"
know.
or healed in 5 weeks or 3 sessions or 12 weeks, or run like your hair is on fire, run away.
Right. If you
Like,
just follow my curriculum of ABC, you will be
no,
healed.
definitely not. And I would say this to anybody who's listening and has felt that sort of like, oh my gosh, I just cannot get this together. Remember that you never really are going back to square one. Even if you have like some sort of something that feels like a re-traumatization, something that feels like you're stuck in a pattern, you might be a little bit stuck and you might have found a new layer that needs some exposing and some healing, but you're not at step 1. You'll never be there again.
Right.
You've already learned all of those things. It's more like a corkscrew,
Mm-hmm.
and it feels like when you come on that backside, like you've gone backwards, but actually, as soon as you round that corner, you realize you are actually a little bit higher than you were last time. So just
Yeah,
giving yourself some grace for that.
that's beautiful. I also want to go back to, you said earned secure attachment.
I did.
Yeah. Would you be willing to give a little explanation of what you mean by that?
Yeah. So we talk about attachment as the foundation for every relationship that we have in our lives. And ideally, we want to see that being something called secure attachment, which is where you have that reliance on your caregivers that they're going to be there no matter what. You know that if something happens, that somebody is there to hold you up, to protect you, that they help you regulate when you don't feel regulated within yourself. So they kind of help you find home base again when you've lost your mind. Think toddler out of control. They're the one that gets down on their knees, looks you in the eyes, and gives you the hug and says it's going to be okay, and helps you come back to baseline. All of those things, dependent care, like that they are dependable, that they're going to be there emotionally, physically, that you're going to have what you need. That's secure attachment. Then you have other types of attachment where we talk about disorganized, avoidant, anxious, where you're never really sure what's going to happen with your caregivers. You don't really know if they're going to show up for you or not. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. or there's something transactional about it all the time, or you feel like you are bad for having needs. Any of those things can be attachment wounds, and including neglect and abandonment, and of course abuse. And so when you go through your life cycle and you make relationships with other people, whether it's friendships, romantic relationships, peer relationships, those are all based on a foundation of what your attachment style was as a child. So you can have these dysfunctions, whether they're big or little, show up in all of these other relationships because of what happened as a kid. Earned secure attachment is something, whether it's in your adolescence or even as an adult, it's something that happens where you have a relationship with somebody that helps you kind of have those attachment wounds healed.
Yeah.
It's somebody who becomes dependable. It's somebody who helps you co-regulate. It's somebody that you know you can count on, that you don't have to do any sort of mental gymnastics for that person or emotional gymnastics for that to see you. And so that's somebody that becomes your earned secure attachment. And what is beautiful is that the research shows us that when we have earned secure attachment, we can be just as successful in our parenting and in our relationships as someone who had secure attachment to begin with. Again, we are back to how God has wired us for the healing, not for the wounding.
Oh, I just think that's so beautiful. So even if we grow up in so much brokenness, when we're able to find those healthy things, God sets it up for those emotionally corrective experiences that can help us heal and give us that earned secure attachment so we can then thrive in a healthier way and make better choices.
Yes.
Moving forward in relationship. And so it's like a positive feedback cycle.
Exactly.
That's so beautiful. I think some people think that so much of maybe trauma or just issues are lots of times thinking, and they can be, but you were talking about the body. And so I'm wondering if you would talk a little bit more about how being aware of our physical sensations, how so often it's like the dashboard of the car, right? That's saying, oh, this is doing something, this is doing something. Because even, as you were talking about that with your friend who was in the cohort, and then I'm feeling a physical sensation, and that's just one story. It's not even my story, right? And so as things happen, I think there are so many times that we have a physical sensation, we ignore it, but sometimes it guides us and we won't do whatever we know we need to do because it's like, I know that, you're not consciously thinking, I know that physical sensation, but it's still guiding you. It's still maybe taking the steering wheel and, driving the bus. So anyway, if you want to say anything about how it shows up, how to be aware of it, and what to do with it when it does show up.
Yes. So if it's okay, I want to go back to when we learn to ignore it.
Great.
So when we have deep dysfunction, profound trauma in our history, part of what has happened is we have learned to ignore the signals of our body. Especially, you will hear this often with people who are survivors of sexual trauma, whether it's as a child, an adolescent, they had to disconnect from their body in order to survive. So when your body tries to do something, you try to disconnect because you learned survival was about disconnection, right? That's how you survived, was to disconnect. Or you learned to ignore it so that you didn't respond to your body, so that you wouldn't make your parents angrier, or you wouldn't get in trouble, or whatever that is. Especially if you have parents outside of you, you feel one thing in your body, you say what's going on emotionally, and they're telling you that that's not true. And so you have all of these disjointed, convoluted messages that you get about whether you should or should not listen to your body. So part of it is relearning how to connect with your body and not being driven by what your feelings
Right.
are, right? But pay attention to them. So I once heard somebody say that emotions are like, and I think we could say this a little bit about what's going on in our body. They're like the toddler in the car. You don't want to put them behind the wheel because you're going to crash. You don't lock them in the trunk because that's not safe. You want them in their little seat snugly where they belong in the back so you can see them, hear them, attune to them, and respond accordingly. And I love that little analogy. And I think that that's exactly, again, a place where we need help. We need help learning how to tune into our body. Our body is not the enemy. Those feelings that we're feeling are not the enemy. It is good to learn where they're coming from because bodily sensations could be triggered because something is familiar from a traumatic memory and it's not appropriate in the moment. So being able to assess, to be able to say, but in order to do that, you can't think your way out of a trigger. You have to start with something. If it's a bodily trigger, you cannot think your way out of that in the beginning. You can eventually. So what we do is we talk about two things, top down and bottom up in therapy. Top down means we're going to start here in the executive area of the brain. This is where we might be thinking about narrative therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, those types of things. Then the other way is where we talk about bottom up. And that just means the lower part of like where the brainstem is. And that's kind of the oldest part of the brain. That's where your autonomic system is, your breathing, your rest and digest, all of those kinds of things. We can start there. Those are more the feelings. Because if you think about it, babies start with how they feel. And what we get from a baby is their response to what they feel hungry, they feel wet, they feel alone, they feel sad. They're not cognitively thinking, well, I wonder if I'm actually hungry right now. No baby is doing that, right? Like that's the oldest part of the brain. The brain develops this way, which is also why when we have trauma, this part can be impacted because it's the last to develop. So if we can start with that older part of the brain where the amygdala is, where we can start to pay attention to what's happening in the body and then enter into things like breath work, which breathing is all over the Bible. We see that. Meditation, which is all over the Bible. We see that, right? That peace of God, just even being able to pick your favorite verse, break it in half, right? Inhale one part, exhale the other part.
Yes.
Use something like that. Whatever's going to help you find that baseline so that you have space for curiosity. Curiosity is your best friend when you're working on a healing journey because it will keep you out of rigidity. It will keep you out of judgment towards yourself and other people, and it will keep you out of shame. And so if you can calm the nervous system enough to say, what's happening right now? I am feeling, and you name the feeling. I'm feeling heat in my face. I'm feeling tingling behind my eyes. What's happening right now? And just to get curious about it, really integrating what's happening bodily with your brain, with your mind, taking things together. That's a powerful combination for your healing. Now, as you learn to trust your nervous system and that it's not betraying you, that you're not being in a situation where your nervous system says one thing and it's completely inappropriate for where you are, as you learn to trust, the key then is to tune into that and to pay attention to that gut that is happening. When scripture talks about the heart, in the ancient context, heart and gut, like they're not separated, they're together. They're together. And so allowing that to be together, really working on being an integrated being, recognizing that the mental, emotional, and physical all play together. Even when you think about verses like, as a man thinks in his heart, so he shall be, right? Or if you think about any verses that talk about what we believe inside, hope deferred makes the heart sick. Hope is an emotion. Heart sick means that you actually feel sick. Like it's brought you down. It's weighed you down. This is not some separation of we're leaning so heavily into therapy that we have forgotten about faith, that we have forgotten about what our Christian values and the word says. This is that redemptive worldview that brings it all together and helps us recognize systemically how it all works together for our betterment.
It's so beautiful. I love it. It's time for a segment called What is Happening?
So we're at our lake house, and the way we get into our kayaks, not that I'm recommending this, so nope. people don't do this. But the way we get into our kayaks is we set them down in the water, and then we come from the dock and we climb down into the kayak. So it's not like a flat surface where you launch, right? And so, I mean, I've been doing this for 6 years, 7 years, getting into my kayak the very same way. And this tells us also about brains and creatures of habits and familiarity. Normally, my kayak faces this way. So when I get in like this. My left side of the body is out towards the water, and I'm left-handed, and I like it that way, right? So we were a little bit hurried. My husband drops the kayak in the water with it facing this way. And rather than say, let's turn it around, I was like, that's fine. And so I start to get in the kayak, and the kayak starts to tip, and I am a third in the kayak, a third in the water, and a third on the dock. And I was like, what is happening right now? Like, I've never had that happen. I'm like, what is happening right now? I'm half irritated and half cracking up. And my husband is holding on to me. And I look at him and I go, just let me go. Just let me go. And he goes, nope. And then he waited until I steadied myself and could get myself like in the kayak. And then he was like, are you good? And I'm like, yeah, I'm good. And it was just this little moment in my head where I was like, isn't that just like God? When you're like, okay, I've screwed up. I don't know what's happening. Just leave me alone. And he's like, no, I will not leave you alone. I will not let you go. And it was like just such a beautiful moment of kind of God using my husband in that moment to be like, I won't let you go.
Right. Oh, I love that. So you never ended up fully in the water.
I did not, because of my husband. Yeah, I did not. I had resigned myself though. I was like, oh, I'm clothed and I'm just going in, and it's just going to have to be fine. And he was like, just let me go. Literally said it. Just let me go. He was like, no, not let you go.
Oh, I love that. That's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
It was great to be here. Thanks, Alicia.